Hi, everyone, and welcome to Human Centered. I'm Nick Brunker, a Group Director of Experience Strategy and your host for the show. Thanks for tuning us in. As promised, we have one more special edition episode with Karen Boswell, our Chief Experience Officer of EMEA, who was down in Austin, Texas at South by Southwest. She has since, as if you've heard the last episode, flown back to London and is with us now to be able to give us kind of a recap of the entire weekend at large, and a lot of great stuff to get into. So be able to boil up what was a very, very busy handful of days and give us some key themes overarchingly as she looks back after a few days to kind of recoup as best you can after going across the pond and give us again the overarching recap of the weekend. Karen, how was the travel back?
Wasn't too bad, I managed to get some Zeds on the plane and a couple of days back on the ground. I think I'm back in my local zone, but thank you for having me back on.
Of course. Thank you for all the effort and the time you put in over the last few days and going into this week. I'd love to kind of, as you have a day or two to reflect on it, break down kind of a handful of different topics that you feel like boiled to the top after kind of getting a chance to marinate on it. If you had maybe your first one, not in any particular order, what was the first key theme that you would say after looking back? This was the theme that came out, or one of the themes that came out.
So it's funny you say sort of marinate on it. That feels very relevant to having just come back from Texas. Great Freudian slip. I did actually bring a lot of marinade back, and whilst marinating things in the background, I went through a mind mapping exercise of all my notes and clustered them, and there were 4 themes that came out of it, and these aren't in any particular order other than my post-its on the wall. So the first is the overarching theme of data, which feels like a really obvious thing, but actually there were a few points within it that are less obvious that I made a lot of notes on and spoke to a lot of people about. Data ethics being one of the sub-agendas under that overarching head, and this idea of how do we formalize ethical data? How do we formalize agendas and committees around who decides what ethical use of data is? And as we move into algorithmic stances and we move into increasingly artificial intelligence, like what are the imperatives from an ethical use and ethical data lakes to organizations, and how do we move that forward? And so more questions than there were answers, but I think there's a lot of people trying to make sure that the right governance is in place before we hit this cusp of exponential speed of adoption of algorithms, because that's when it gets super hard to kind of rein in and control.
Do you feel like, because I kind of have this sense that we're, if not like putting our toe over the line to that point of we're kind of past the point of no return. I know we're not quite there yet, but how close are we to not having a wrangle on it? I know that sounds like ominous, but not intending to be ominous, other than to say things are already at a breakneck pace. How close do you think we are after hearing some of the conversations of not having time to catch up, and we're always going to be playing from behind?
You're right. I think you're right. You make a valid point, and I think the drive toward data transformation and digital transformation has resulted in this tsunami of data that's been coming our way. And I don't think enough people have got a grip on how to use data, let alone why they have the right to use data. And I think successfully identifying the value of what data is as a strategic asset to a brand or a business, but based on having the right to adapt and adopt the use of that data is what's causing some competitive friction, let's say. And there's quite a lot of flexible governance in place at the moment, especially when you start to consider, what the Facebooks or the Metas of the world, should I say, sub point on the word meta, by the way, but they get away with a lot versus institutionalized legacy businesses. And I think there's some frustration around that. But at the same time, data can be a really powerful resource for change. And actually, when we start to broaden and deepen the reach of how we access and construct and empower the right use of data, the influence on policymakers or governments or those who can put Facebook back in a box actually provide sustainable solutions to quite deep-rooted societal, cultural, business, organizational issues. And that, I think, is more the track. Everybody's aware that it's a problem, but no one's quantifying or qualifying a resolve that is fair or mainstream for organizational change in the right way.
The other thing about data that I think is interesting is when you hear, and depending on what the spheres of marketing you're working on or in customer experience, it's becoming much more of a focal point, at least in the conversations I've had, is data value exchange. And so obviously there's tons of data being pumped into these lakes, and how they're being used. It's obviously going to go back to your governance model, but we are also at a point in time in our human condition, let's call it, where everybody is, to your point, really self-aware of their data, whatever that actually means, and being less willing to essentially feed the beast, so to speak. And so I'm very curious, and really more of just a dialogue point more than a question, to see how the next, let's just call it 2 or 3 years, actually evolve in terms of what do brands and even just individuals do from a back and forth perspective of, why should I give you my data? How can I not give you my data? The macro theme of data privacy and data ethics comes back to the system only works and continues to build and get better if the data continues to come in and is being fed. And I think some of it's unavoidable. You're not going to completely shut off your connected world, but at the same time, we are at this kind of, I feel like, a fulcrum point where customers, just humans in general, are very aware but also hesitant to give too much data. And when you start to wade into some of our other topics we'll get into, metaverse, health, reconnection through tech, that is a very important piece of the formula, input to get output, right?
I agree. And my build on that would be literacy around data as well. I think comparably in the world, there's a small percentage of people who genuinely understand what the hell it is we just said.
Yeah.
And the stuff that goes behind it, and they're probably the sorts of people that are going to listen to this podcast. But actually, how do we make sure that the basic data literacy skills are built into mainstream workplaces, like mainstream sectors? How does it go into curriculum for classrooms, for example? Like, how do we make sure the generations that are going to make this right and sustainable for a future actually have that basic fluency and analytical skills? And so I think it's not just a now, it's a next 50 plus years that we are considering when we talk about it. And, we mentioned cryptos and NFTs and DAOs with these kind of throwaway comments because everyone's a bit like, what the fuck? But it's nefarious. It's quite nefarious at the moment. And so, I think that the general sort of sense, apart from those really immersed at the forefront and creating it, most of the people just felt a bit overwhelmed. It's like, for God's sake, like, we haven't even finished sorting the last thing out. What's this next thing? And so I think we have to be very mindful and very aware of how we balance enablement through technology and actually just the mental stress it can put people under. Just, they can't necessarily explain it, but they just have this feeling that it's everywhere and moving really fast and they're getting a little bit left behind. So there's the people on track at South by Southwest, and then there's the world that we're addressing that weren't there. Right. And I do think literacy and understanding is probably the most empowering thing we can do right now for everyone.
Well, and you talk about literacy, the segue into the M word, the metaverse, which we talked about in a couple of podcasts, begrudgingly or not begrudgingly. People, I think, are always interested in, okay, what is this exactly? What is next? But they are tiptoeing around, like, truly understanding or even wanting to dive into what is the metaverse. And I know this was another one of those things that you shared as a relatively large conversational point that seemed to come up a lot. Talk more about the metaverse.
So let's just define really clearly what the metaverse is. And it's essentially this blending and blurring of digitally enhanced worlds, businesses, realities. It brings together cloud and AI. It involves things like the blockchain. It involves all of those different sort of NFTs and crypto and all of those words and buzzwords all amalgamate in this place. Edge technologies, so things that don't have a hard stop, that blur between physical and digital. And it is a thing. I think there was I remember Ready Player One coming into mainstream, and I read that when I was, I don't even want to say how old I was, but I was definitely one of the first people to read that book. And then when the movie came out, I remember thinking, oh wow, this is going to excite some people and it's going to scare a lot of people, actually, because those that realize how close that technology is are going to have this sort of, oh wow, amazing, maybe I don't want to buy that headset. But it's not a headset anymore. So like in that world, you kind of go into an environment, right? This is beyond that, because it's starting to blur all the different alternate realities, the blended realities. It's blurring your identities, and that was something we talked about on one of our podcasts. There's multiple worlds, there's multiple projects, and the big question is, are we ready for it? So when we think about what does that mean for brands, what does that mean for mass consumerism, what does that mean for customer experiences, commerce experiences, employee experiences, my belief and what I was picking up on the track is that the businesses, the brands that will thrive will need to establish safe, inclusive, and of course I'm going to say human-led experiences as they create these worlds, because I think it will be incredibly overwhelming otherwise.
Did you get the sense that, I think there's that moment of, wait a minute, Ready Player One, like that can happen in real life, or maybe quasi real life? I don't even know, the meta life. The idea of technology in that sense, of that magnitude, starts to kind of like make you spin around in your head when you start thinking about it. Did you get a sense that there was more, holy shit, that's awesome, or I'm not really sure about that, discomfort versus awe? Was there a balance that you were feeling while you were down there?
So day one, there was a lot of, wait, what? Day two, it was like, oh, this could actually be really cool. And by day three, everyone was like, oh God, metaverse, multiverse, megaverse, mecha, multi, metaverse, what is this thing? It was just like, you could just kind of hear people got fatigue really quickly. And that was like 3 days of talking about it and just talking about it. Now, the thing is, you look at some of the amazing work that has been done. So one of our guests was obviously Sol Rogers, and he works at Magnopus, and they created a digital twin of the Dubai Expo. I mean, you look at that thing and you're like, it's pretty damn cool, but you are signing up to go to an event and you are choosing to be in it.
Yep.
When it becomes a thing where, there were conversations around putting mainstream mass fashion brands into the metaverse and essentially having them be able to interrupt your digital avatars and personalities, which might feel really far away, but it's not when you consider a world where TikTok and Instagram and Meta all converge, and suddenly you're like, well, hang on a minute, this is my little bubble, what are you doing in here? And there is literally no escaping a bit. So I think as people were realizing what it could mean in the wrong hands or the wrong mindset, there was this bit of a, oh God, are we ready for this? And I think the second thing that was quite, bubbling up, and I remember back in the day, I'm going back 7 or 8 years now, when we were talking about bridging uncanny valley, when we were getting to, volumetric captures of people and putting them into virtual reality experiences, the level up on that. And again, it's sort of all of those things and more is this sort of what Accenture call the unreal, air quotes. So building on that, digital twins, and again, Will came on and talked a lot about that, but the scene of an environment that is increasingly filled with machines, avatars that are possibly human, these unreal qualities start to become intrinsic to algorithmic data. And when that is used with bad actors or bad brands or perhaps just misinformed. We've had a world of fake news and deep fakes and bots, which isn't gone yet. It's really hard to tell the difference sometimes. So what does that mean when suddenly we don't have the data rules that we talked about, we don't have the ethics that we just talked about, but we do have the technology and we do have a lot of power-hungry businesses? And I think that is what is making people kind of go, well, what's real and what's not?
Yeah, and it really is an interesting time when you think about like the mass quantities of people that would have to ultimately get in to kind of get things to that critical mass area. Right now, you start to see people that have experienced it. Obviously at VMLY&R, we've done some meetings where we have these Metaverse Mondays now where we kind of are grouped together and learning more about it. And that's what VMLY&R always does, relentlessly curious, right? But I think it's going to be interesting to see how some of those things you just talked about manifest and how quickly they manifest when it starts to become, this is probably not going to be exactly a one-to-one, but when Facebook became Facebook pages and you were able to bring businesses online. Before it was very nuanced and it was a social media tool that was designed for a very finite group of people in a very finite set of circumstances. And then they opened up Pandora's box and it became this channel as we know it, as it is now for business and advertising and everything. It was obviously the next phase of their transformation at what is now Meta. But I have a suspicion we're going to kind of follow that same pattern where there will reach a point of critical mass where enough people are in it that you have to get on the train or don't. and that's to me where I'm interested in your perspective too. How close are we, do you think, to critical mass where people are going to accept this as a new way of interaction versus I know it's coming, I know what it is, I kind of I understand it, but I'm willing to engage with it more regularly?
I think the rate of adoption will be quite slow overall. I think where there isn't a need or a want, I just don't think it's necessary or engaging enough at the moment. We saw the same thing with virtual reality, and then it was quickly not replaced but displaced with augmented reality because augmented reality was much more accessible and easier to produce for, and it didn't come with a lot of the expensive physical architecture around it. And both of those things I still believe in and advocate for, but I think we definitely had that phase where it's like, we need a VR thingy to be cool, we need an AR thingy to be cool, and then it's an AR thingy, and it's like, stop with the thingies. It's like and I think this is a big thingy, and I think it just, why? So I can see some brilliant use cases for it. Okay, so being able to go and walk around an event you couldn't otherwise get to be able to walk around an office you couldn't otherwise go and interview for, to maybe try on, new designs for your house, or a wardrobe in a whole new way that you can't, sort of leveling up from the virtual mirrors and things you can do on your phone. Like, I can see some reasons for it to exist. I would be greatly saddened if we ended up moving to too much of it too soon. And to your point around Facebook, there was mass adoption and now there's fairly mass abandonment. So, how do things stay mainstream forever? The latest thing is cool until it's not. I think that was a quote that came out of one of our podcasts, and it's so true. Like, your latest phone is, I think Will said this, your latest phone is really exciting until your nan texts you on it. I came off Facebook, because I know my parents will never listen to this podcast. I came off Facebook when my parents went on it. So I was like, it's just another way for them to get hold of me, and I haven't been on it for years. And I took the second brand in the world onto Facebook. So, I was an advocate for it. And then I was an advocate not for it. And I think it's just that, but exponentially bigger. So yeah, I think it's exciting. And my one final build before I make you move us on from the metaverse.
Thank goodness.
We do have, by the way, whole other keynote on this, and there is a lot of really interesting stuff. So maybe we can pop that up on the site alongside this, because we do have experts in this field, and it is super important. But I'm mindful of how many people I spoke to at South Bend and were like, for the love of God, loving the podcast, but please stop talking about metaverse. But my one final thing that I thought, and I picked this up on a health talk related to the metaverse, and I just thought this wasn't mainstream, but it was kind of really made me stop and think, is this idea of biomimicry inspiring computing for the quantum era. And I was like, I mean, that just levels it all up again. So when we think about biomimicry, in human sense, it's, how if you lean in and talk in a certain way, I'll lean in and talk in a certain way. But actually, when you take that to another level, systems and architecture that draw inspiration from biological flows, processes, designs, anatomies, all of those kinds of things, is now a key focus of how we are performing development in computational functions, such as computer chips, such as naturally flowing, adaptive, progressive algorithms. And when you combine that biomimicry with quantum computing and the metaverse,
mind blown. Oh my gosh.
So
we can close the book on the metaverse. We can actually close. All right, we're going to move on. It's done. The metaverse is done, at least for today. You kind of started to guide into health a little bit. And I know in part of our podcast discussions over the weekend, we talked a lot about health and how technology is affecting that overarchingly. But I thought there were some interesting nuggets that you pulled out over the course of the few days. Let's talk about health as kind of that macro topic.
Yeah, so I'm glad you picked up on this, actually, because it sort of restores faith and it puts balance back into some of that frenetic energy I think people were feeling around a lot of the technology. So I was not actually hugely surprised to learn that 1 in 10 people won't bother to go and see a doctor, even if they think they're seriously ill. And over 25% of that say it's because of the pandemic. Now, those are big numbers, right?
Yeah.
But I genuinely wasn't actually that surprised, because when you think about it, there is a lot of nervousness around health systems across the world at the moment. But what's great is that generally health and wellness as a now sort of catch-all for inside and outside and the looking after of, definitely had a really big shift and a really big focus. And I think I said on, I can't remember if it was day 2 or day 3, but it felt much less tech focused and much more people focused. And there were some themes that were coming out of it. I'll start with mindfulness, because that is a word that's been around for a long time, but I think has taken on new meaning. And I think a lot of people associate mindfulness with yoga and meditation, perhaps, but actually there are some macro trends that are coming out, like mindful mood diaries, just being conscious of being aware. It's a strange sentence to come out with, but how you're showing up in a virtual world or a real world, and how perhaps it's affecting you. And where the underlying anxiety might be, because sometimes we spot it too late. So just this undercurrent of, am I okay? And then how, what is this feeling? Like, how do I identify what this feeling is? And then there were things like mindful drinking. So a lot of people turned to alcohol in the first series of lockdowns. And I think a lot of people realized that's not a good thing. So also not wanting to go then teetotal and go the other way. So right. This idea of mindful drinking and correlating that to how you're feeling. Are you drinking to feel to celebrate, or are you drinking to commiserate, and sort of being aware of what that might do to your emotions? And then just things like mindful moving, rather than it being a yoga thing or a meditation thing, like just mindful moving and mindful exercise. And there was a lot of research that was showing that combining the mindfulness and the exercise and the diaries just lowers your risk of depression. and boosts your mood and relieves stress and reduces anxiety. But also just educating on why, the release of serotonin and those different feel-good chemicals. So there's a lot of services and apps and simple things that you can find on the internet that are just helping people access tools to self-reflect and probably not self-diagnose per se, but just be aware and be mindful of how they're feeling and how they're acting.
What I think is really cool about it is that right now, I feel like, and you can tell me if you've seen the same thing, there are pockets of solutions that do sleep, or how's your gut doing, or are you mindful? But what I feel like the secret sauce that hasn't really come together yet is, and dare I say, Apple's starting to toy with this, is things like Apple Watch are tracking your blood oxygen and your heart rate and all that good stuff. There is no what's the way of putting it, 360-degree view of me, and maybe it's a good thing or a bad thing. Mm-hmm. But I think where when we talk about health, the interest that I have, and what I think is interesting overarchingly, is I might have these individual apps, and at times maybe these apps are communicating the data, but the data is there. It's just not working together potentially at this point at a macro level mm-hmm. to be a holistic help from a human need to make me my best self. So right now there's mm-hmm. a pocket of data that's telling me how much am I exercising, pocket of data, how well am I eating? And I think what is going to be interesting is solutions that start to be able to stitch those things together in a more holistic, predictive sort of way, because that's where I feel like, talk about human need, you're going to get a fuller picture of your health using technology when it starts to become truly holistic and truly connected across a series of many different touch points that, as we know, the human body has interconnected touch points, interconnected things, but in the data sphere, maybe they're not as well connected to share learnings, be symbiotic in that sense.
Yeah, and I think to address that point, and then I'll build on it, there is the start of the connections there. So, for example, gut health is a track of conversation, brain health is a track of conversation. But I think what's interesting is that we sort of know over here that prioritizing your gut health, both your digestive system, but also your GI tract, I can never say the long version of that, so I'll go with the short version, balancing the bacteria and how you digest food helps with energy, and the fluidity of your movements, and your brain health, your brain axes can be conditioned to have an eating pattern, and so making changes slowly can also then improve your gut health and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So it's this sort of idea of connecting what you put in to how you perform mentally and how you train yourself to moderate what you put in. So this sort of like gut to brain, right, brain to gut symbiosis. And then I think the build on that is that beyond just connecting the services, and I think, I have a Garmin and I like it because it does monitor my sleep and my stress and all of those kinds of things. But not everybody wants to wear a Garmin or can afford a Garmin. And so I think what was nice about some of these services is that they are starting to democratize that beyond even the price of a Garmin. But my build even more so is there's a new sort of set of personalization in the form of supplements and food-focused remedies and boosted beverages and conscious eating. And actually, wouldn't it be great if my Garmin could connect to those things as connected services, mm-hmm, and I could have a week by week delivery of what I need? At the moment, I buy the same vitamins based on one of these services, and I'm pretty sure I probably need to be updating them somehow. I don't know, but And I think that's the direction of travel. That last point is amusing because nobody explicitly talked about it. But if I look at what's going on there, you can kind of go, wow, to build on your point and then take it one further, this connected health ecosystem of me and my needs, there is a space for businesses and companies to help there, I think.
It's very cool. I think it's fair to say a good way to round out our special edition of Human Centered is to close on people. Talk a little bit about, the themes that you saw as it relates to human connection and, just the reliance or over-reliance on technology.
So there is definitely, we talked about talent shifts. We talked about being open to what this new way of working means. Like, how do we support people where they are in a way that is not beholden to how we were before, whether geographically, whether skills wise. And I think if we can get a better fluidity of skills population going, I genuinely think all economies will benefit. I think that there is a lot of opportunity for people to connect in more interesting ways, but we need to build for those people and embrace the friction that causes our organizations, our businesses, rather than putting the needs of our business before those people, because people are very quickly feeling the fatigue a lot. So what is our model? What is our framework? And how do we allow, goes back to that enablement, how do we allow people to be enabled, not having to break through yet another set of meta firewalls? And I think there's this idea of technology anxiety. And actually, this is a slight sub-talking point, but the themes are the same: climate and eco-anxiety. And they cross-pollinate because, people are investing in Bitcoin on one hand and then reading about how much damage it's doing to the rainforest on the other. Yeah. And then you've got this explosion of technology that we're kind of going, yay, this is amazing. We're like, are we not killing our planet at the same time? Like, what? And so there's this sort of eco-anxiety that is a thing that's now a phrase, and people are growing both anxious and responsive to what's happening in the world. There's a lot of people, the search volume is through the roof. It was like up 800% or something. I'm not going to quote that factually because I didn't write it down, but I just remember it being huge. And so that then goes back to this detachment from technology. And I think the one thing that we all need to be mindful of, whoever we are, whatever our role, is that humans want to reconnect without technology. Like, I've said this word several times, but it's because it came up a lot. There is fatigue around being constantly connected all of the time. And just because we can doesn't mean we should.
Karen, I can't thank you enough for the last handful of days. This has been such a treat to be able to spend as much time as we have together virtually, talking about South by Southwest. And obviously, we will be, I'm sure, conversing again quite a bit. Thank you for everything. And I'm sure we'll be catching up soon.
And maybe we'll even get to do it in real next time.
IRL, yes.
Some of the things that we're talking about. But yeah, I think, if I may, I think there's just one sort of closing comment that I'd love to put out there. And, our world is as slow now as it will ever be again. And if there was ever a time to be human first and human-centered in how we resolve, I think it now more than ever is pertinent to make sure that we put people first. And there's a really simple equation that drives positive impact, and that's human need plus technology, in that order. And if we could just close with making sure that reaches as many people as possible, I think we'll be in a really good place to design the right thing and then get the thing right.
Totally. And I know there's lots more slideware that you're putting together and deeper dives into some of these macro topics. So in the next week or so, or upcoming days, you could check our show notes. We'll upload links to those, and people that are listening to this podcast can follow along. And we, of course, invite you to listen to our human-centered podcast ongoing, as we, on a quasi-monthly basis, are able to upload some great new conversations and content. Obviously, Karen's been a regular guest on the program. And again, Karen, really appreciate all of your time and expertise. Thanks again for being with us.
Thank you, Nick. It was great.
And thank you for listening to Human Centered as well. To learn more about our CX practice and our approach to the work, check us out online at vmlyr.com/CX. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.